In the aftermath of Vanessa's letter, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The past, once a source of pain, had transformed into a foundation upon which he built his happiness. Yet, the letter stirred unresolved emotions, prompting him to reflect on the journey that had led him here. One evening, as Layla prepared dinner, Ethan shared the contents of Vanessa's letter. Layla listened intently, her expression a mix of understanding and concern. "It's a testament to your strength," Layla said softly. "You've not only found your own peace, but have inspired others to seek theirs." Ethan nodded, appreciating Layla's unwavering support. He realized that while the past had shaped him, it no longer defined him. In the days that followed, Ethan focused on his family and writing. He poured his emotions into his work, crafting stories that resonated with readers. Layla continued to nurture their family and her bakery, her passion evident in every creation. Their children, Emma and Lucas, thrived in this environment of love and stability. They excelled in their studies and extracurricular activities, their laughter and joy a constant presence in the home. As the years passed, Ethan and Layla's bond deepened. They celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and milestones, each moment, reinforcing their commitment to each other. One summer, they took a family trip to the coast. The children reveled in the sun and sand, while Ethan and Layla found quiet moments to reflect on their journey. Sitting on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, they discussed their dreams for the future. "What do you think, Layla?" Ethan asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Layla smiled, her eyes reflecting the depth of their shared history. "I think we've built something beautiful," she replied. Their conversation turned to the idea of expanding their family further. The thought of welcoming another child filled them with joy and anticipation. They discussed the logistics, the timing, and the love they had to offer. As they returned home, the idea of adoption began to take root. They researched, attended seminars, and connected with agencies, all the while keeping their children informed and involved in the process. Months later, they received the news they had been hoping for. A child was waiting for them. The adoption process was both challenging and rewarding, but it was a journey they undertook together, united in their commitment to providing a loving home. The day they brought their new child home was filled with emotion. Their family had grown, and their hearts had expanded to accommodate the new love. They named their child Noah, a name that symbolized the new beginning they had embraced. As Noah settled into their home, the family adjusted to the new dynamics. Emma and Lucas took on their roles as older siblings with enthusiasm, guiding Noah through the wonders of their world. Ethan and Layla continued to nurture their passions, supporting each other's dreams while creating new ones together. Through every challenge and triumph, they remained steadfast partners. They supported each other's dreams, celebrated each other's successes, and provided comfort during difficult times. Their love story, once marked by uncertainty and past wounds, had transformed into a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and unwavering commitment. In the quiet moments, as they watched their children play or worked side by side in the bakery, Ethan and Layla would often reflect on their journey. The twists and turns, the unexpected detours, all led them to this beautiful present, a life rich with love, laughter, and fulfillment. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and eyes set on the horizon, they embraced each new day, knowing that together they could navigate any path the future held. The end. The engine's hum was the only sound as I drove away from the house that no longer felt like home. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles white. Her message echoed in my head, the words searing into my mind. We need to talk. About what? There was nothing left to say. I had heard all I needed to hear when I walked into our bedroom that night and found her crying, guilt etched into every line of her face. She confessed everything. She didn't know I already had the proof, the messages, the photos, the hotel, receipts. She thought her words were a revelation, but they were just a confirmation of what I had already known. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it on the passenger seat, her name flashing on the screen. I ignored it, focusing on the road. But my mind kept drifting back. Why now? What could she possibly want to say after everything she'd done? I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a bar I used to go to with Daniel. We'd spent countless nights here, laughing, drinking, talking about everything and nothing. Now the sight of the place made me sick. But I needed a drink. Inside, the dim lighting matched my mood. I took a seat at the bar, ordering a whiskey, neat. The first sip burned, but the fire was welcome. It gave me something to focus on other than the hollow ache in my chest. A voice pulled me out of my thoughts. Long day? I turned to see an old friend, Mike, sliding onto the stool next to me. We'd known each other since high school, but we hadn't talked much lately. I wondered how much he knew. Small towns had a way of spreading secrets like wildfire. Long year, I muttered, taking another sip. He studied me, his eyes narrowing. You look like hell, man. I let out a humorless laugh. I feel worse. Mike leaned in, lowering his voice. I heard about Daniel and, He hesitated, his face tightening. I don't even know what to say, man. That's rough. I shrugged, the whiskey helping me maintain the illusion of indifference. Yeah, well, people do crazy things, I guess. Mike hesitated before asking, You talked to her yet? I looked at him sharply. Why would I? He leaned back, surprised by my tone. I don't know. Maybe to get answers? I don't need answers. I know everything I need to know. Mike shook his head, his fingers tapping the bar. I don't think you do. She's been coming around asking about you. Looks like she's been through hell herself, I scoffed. Good, she deserves it. But even as I said the words, they tasted bitter. I hated that a part of me still cared. Mike took a long drink before saying, Maybe you should hear her out. Might help you move on. I drained my glass, the burn less intense this time. Or it might just piss me off more. He shrugged. Only one way to find out. We sat in silence after that, both lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, Mike slapped me on the back, muttering something about needing to get home to his wife. I watched him leave, envy curling in my stomach. I ordered another drink, and another. But the whiskey couldn't numb the memories, her laughter, her smile. The way she used to look at me, like I was her whole world. And then I saw her looking at him the same way. I paid my tab, stumbling out of the bar. The cold air hit me, a slap to the face. My phone buzzed again. Her again. I was tempted to throw the damn thing into the street, but I answered this time, my voice rough. What? There was a pause. Then her voice, fragile and small. Evan, please, can we talk? I leaned against my car, my eyes closing. What could you possibly have to say? She hesitated, her breath hitching. It's about Daniel. There are things you don't know. My heart skipped a beat. I know enough. No, you don't, she insisted, her voice cracking. Please, Evan, meet me, just once. I owe you the truth. The truth. I thought I already had the truth. But there was something in her voice, something that sounded like fear. I sighed, the exhaustion catching up to me. Fine. Tomorrow. Coffee shop on 5th, noon. Before she could respond, I hung up, tossing the phone into the passenger seat. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with questions. What more could there possibly be to this mess? I drove home, my thoughts tangled and restless. That night, sleep didn't come easy. And when it did, I dreamed of betrayal, of lies, of my brother's face twisted with guilt and something else. Something I couldn't quite understand. I woke up in a cold, Sweat, my heart pounding. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough, because whatever secrets she was keeping, I was finally ready to hear them. The next morning, the sun rose behind a thick layer of clouds, casting a gray pallor over the city. It matched my mood perfectly. I stood in front of the mirror, my eyes bloodshot from the sleepless night. I looked like hell. But I didn't care. I arrived at the coffee shop early, the air cold and damp. My fingers trembled as I wrapped them around the steaming cup of black coffee, more from anticipation than the chill. My gaze stayed fixed on the door, waiting. She walked in exactly at noon. Even after everything, my heart twisted at the sight of her. Her face was pale, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. She looked older, worn down. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment we just stared at each other, the space between us heavy with unspoken words. She approached slowly, her movements tentative. "Evan, thank you for meeting me." I said nothing, just gestured to the chair across from me. She sat, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her cup. Her eyes darted around the cafe as if she was afraid of being seen. After a beat, she looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. For everything." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You said you owed me the truth. So start talking." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, steeling herself. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you." "Yeah, well, intentions don't mean much now, do they?" I snapped, my anger flaring. "You slept with my brother. You destroyed our marriage. What more is there to say?" Her shoulders sagged, shame coloring her cheeks. "I deserve that. I deserve everything you're feeling." She took a shaky breath. "But you don't know the whole story," I scoffed. "Then enlighten me." She hesitated, her fingers twisting around the cup. "It started months ago. Daniel came to me. He was struggling. He was messed up. He needed someone to talk to." I felt my jaw clench. "And that someone had to be my wife?" Her face crumpled. "I tried to help him. I thought I could be there for him as a friend. But he was manipulative. He played on my sympathies. I was stupid, weak." Her voice wavered. "He told me things. About his life. About his past. Things I didn't know how to handle." I narrowed my eyes. "What things?" She hesitated, guilt flickering in her gaze. "He told me he was in love with me. That he always had been. Even before you and I started dating." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the room tilt, my mind reeling. "That's not possible. He never said anything. Not once." "He kept it to himself," she whispered. "He watched us get together, watched us get married, and he resented you for it. He told me. He hated you for taking me away from him." My head spun, disbelief warring with anger. "And that's supposed to justify what you did?" "No." Her voice broke. "It doesn't justify anything, but I was confused, vulnerable. He made me question everything. He made me believe that I'd chosen the wrong brother." Her face crumpled. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to fight it." My chest tightened, rage bubbling beneath the surface. "So you betrayed me? You slept with him because you were confused?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I was weak, and he took advantage of that. But it was more than that. There's something wrong with him, Evan. Something dark. I didn't see it until it was too late." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" She looked down, her hands trembling. "After you found out, he came to me. He was angry. He said if I didn't leave you, he would ruin you. He said he would destroy everything you loved just to hurt you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. He said he did it on purpose, to break you. My blood ran cold. No, that doesn't make sense. Why would he? Her eyes were pleading. I didn't believe it at first either. But then he showed me photos, messages. He planned this, Evan. He wanted to ruin your life. He used me to get to you. Her voice cracked. I was just collateral damage. I felt my stomach churn, nausea rising. You expect me to believe that he manipulated you? That he planned all of this? She nodded, her face pale. I know it sounds crazy, but I think he hates you more than you realize, and I don't think he's done yet. My heart pounded, fear and disbelief warring within me. What are you saying? She looked around, her eyes wide with paranoia. He told me he's going to make sure you never recover. He's not. Just after your marriage, Evan. He wants to destroy everything. Your career, your reputation, everything. The air left my lungs, my mind spinning. Why? Why would he do that? Her lips trembled. Because he's convinced himself that you took everything from him. Me, our parents' love, his career. Everything he thinks he deserved, he thinks you stole it from him. I sat back, my body numb. He's insane. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Evan. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing, replaying every interaction with Daniel. Every memory twisted into something darker, every conversation laced with hidden meanings. How had I been so blind? How long had he been planning this? My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was my father. I almost didn't answer, but a surge of anger pushed me to pick up. Evan! His voice was stern, the same commanding tone that used to make me fall in line as a kid. We need to talk. Now. About what? I bit back, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. Your mother is in tears. Your brother is missing, and you're tearing this family apart. I let out a bitter laugh. I'm tearing this family apart? That's rich. Maybe you should ask your golden boy what he's been up to. A heavy silence hung between us before he spoke again, his voice low and tense. I don't know what's going on between you two, but you're brothers. Whatever happened, you need to work it out. For the family. For the family, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. Is that all that matters to you? Not the fact that your son betrayed me in the worst possible way? That he tried to destroy my life? He made a mistake. He ruined my marriage, I shouted, the words echoing in the car. He took everything from me, and you expect me to forgive him? To work it out like it's just some childish fight? He's your brother, my father repeated, his tone unyielding. And family forgives. I felt something snap inside me. Is that why you've always forgiven him? Why you let him get away with everything? Because he's the screw-up, and I'm the one who's supposed to be perfect? Is that it? A beat of silence, then a sigh. It's not that simple, Evan. He's always struggled. You know that. Struggled. The word hung in the air, infuriating me. Struggled? He's manipulative, he's destructive, and he's dangerous. My father hesitated. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. He planned this, Dad. He did it on purpose. To hurt me. To destroy me. That's ridiculous. My father scoffed, but there was a hint of doubt in his voice. He wouldn't do that. Then where is he? I demanded. Why is he hiding? If he's so innocent, why won't he face me? My father's silence was answer enough. I gritted my teeth. I'm going to find him, and when I do, he's going to answer for what he's done. Evan, don't do anything stupid, my father warned. We can fix this. We just need to sit down as a family and... There's no fixing this. I cut him off. Not this time. I hung up, throwing the phone onto the passenger seat. I knew where Daniel would go. There was only one place he'd feel safe, the old cabin by Lake Harmony. It was a place we used to go as kids, a family retreat. It was isolated, no neighbors for miles. Our parents hadn't been there in years, but Daniel had always loved it. It was his escape, his hideout. I drove through the winding mountain roads, the trees thickening as I neared the lake. My chest tightened as memories flooded back. Summer nights by the fire, fishing off the dock, laughing as kids without a care in the world. I pushed them away, focusing on the present, on the betrayal, on the confrontation that was about to happen. Parked a ways down the road, not wanting him to hear me coming. The air was cold, a biting wind cutting through the trees. I moved quietly, staying low, my eyes fixed on the cabin up ahead. Smoke curled from the chimney. He was there. My heart raced as I approached, every step heavy with anger and anticipation. I reached the front porch and hesitated, my fist hovering over the door. Then I heard voices inside. His voice. And another. A woman. My blood ran cold as I recognized it. It was her. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She was here. With him. After everything she'd told me, she was still with him. I pressed my ear to the door, there, muffled voices drifting through the wood. "I did everything you asked," she was saying, her tone frantic. "I broke his heart. I did everything to ruin him, just like you wanted. Why isn't it enough?" Daniel's voice was cold, calculated. "Because he's still standing. He still has everything. His job, his friends, his perfect life. He doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed." She sounded desperate. "I can't do this anymore. He's starting to suspect. He's getting too close." "Then you should have done a better job," Daniel snapped. "You were supposed to make him hate you, to break him beyond repair. But you couldn't even do that right." My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. It was all a lie. Every word she'd said to me was a lie. I stumbled back, my body numb. My brother had manipulated her, and she had willingly played along. She had shattered my heart, my life, on his command. I turned and walked away, my vision blurred with tears of rage and betrayal. They were both going to pay for this. I stumbled down the path, the cold wind biting at my face, my thoughts a chaotic storm. My brother had orchestrated everything. He had manipulated her, turned her into a weapon, and aimed her right at me. And she had gone along with it, tearing me apart piece by piece. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head. "I did everything to ruin him, just like you wanted." A surge of anger flooded through me, hot and violent. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I believed? I got back to my car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the cabin through the trees. I could see their shadows moving inside, hear their muffled voices through the crackling of the fire. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to make them feel even, a fraction of the pain they'd inflicted on me. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. They had played me like a fool, turned my life into a game. And the only way to beat them was to turn the tables. I started the car, the engine's growl breaking, the quiet of the woods. I backed away slowly, keeping my headlights off until I was far enough down the road. I didn't need them knowing I was here. Not yet. I drove back into town, my mind racing. I had to be smart about this. If I confronted them now, they'd twist the narrative, spin it around, and somehow I'd end up the villain. No, I needed proof, evidence of what they'd done. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled. My father's words replayed in my head. Family forgives. But how could I forgive this? How could I ever look at Daniel again without seeing the knife he'd plunged into my back? I went inside, the house cold and empty. I poured myself a drink, the amber liquid burning as it went down. I sat in the dark, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I thought about all the nights I'd spent wondering where she was, blaming myself for the distance growing between us, and all the while, she was with him. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through old messages, reading her lies with fresh eyes. Texts where she'd told me she was working late, where she'd said she was too tired to talk, where she'd pretended everything was fine. I found Daniel's number and hovered over the call button. But what would I say? How could I possibly put this into words? I put the phone down, my hands shaking. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, I went to see a private investigator. If I was going to take them down, I needed everything. Texts, emails, photos, anything that proved their betrayal. The investigator, a grizzled man with a scar above his left eyebrow, didn't ask many questions. He just nodded and took the job, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. I went to work, saw my parents, even answered my mother's questions about Daniel with a tight-lipped smile. She was worried, of course. Daniel was still missing, and no one knew where he'd gone. I didn't tell her about the cabin. Let her worry. Let them all worry. Then the investigator called. "Got something for you," he said, his voice crackling through the line. "You're going to want to see this." I met him at his office, a dingy little place above a pawn shop. He slid a manila folder across the desk, his expression grim. "Your brother's been busy." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Photos of Daniel and her together. At the cabin, at hotels, even at family gatherings where they'd exchanged hidden glances, their affair hidden in plain sight. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were emails, too. Long, detailed conversations between them, planning my downfall. They'd plotted everything, from the lies she'd tell me to the fights they'd orchestrate. They'd even discussed how to manipulate my parents, how to make me look like the bad guy if things went south. I felt sick. Every word was a knife, cutting deeper than the last. I closed the folder and looked at the investigator, my hands shaking. "Can you make copies of these?" He nodded. "Already did. And there's more. Your brother, he's been using your name, credit cards, loans. He's setting you up for financial ruin." I stared at him, my blood running cold. "Why?" He shrugged. "Beats me. But it's all here. Signed in your name with his fingerprints all over it. He's been trying to destroy you from every angle." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing myself to stay upright. He wasn't just trying to steal my wife. He was trying to ruin my life completely. I took the copies and left the office, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was calculated, premeditated destruction. I knew what I had to do. I drove back to the cabin, my heart pounding. This time I didn't bother. Parking down the road, I pulled right up to the front door, my tires crunching over the gravel. I stormed up the steps and threw open the door. I moved to a new city far enough away to escape the whispers and the pitying looks. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I found a small apartment overlooking the river, its quiet solitude giving me the space I needed to heal. Nights were the hardest. Silence has a way of amplifying memories, and mine were haunted by images of Daniel and Lisa, their laughter echoing through my mind. I tried drowning it out with work, with noise, with anything that could distract me from the gaping wound they left behind. But healing wasn't about distraction. It was about facing the pain head on. One evening, months after the trial, I got a letter in the mail. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Lisa's. I almost tore it up, but my curiosity won out. Her words were desperate, apologetic. She wrote about her guilt, how she'd lost everything, because of her choices. She claimed she never meant to hurt me, that it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control. She begged for my forgiveness, not to reconcile, but to find some semblance of peace. She wrote about Daniel, about how he was struggling, how he was a broken man now, full of regrets and shame. I read it twice, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, to revel in the misery they'd brought upon themselves. But all I felt was exhaustion. I didn't write back. Life moved forward slowly. I focused on rebuilding myself, mentally, emotionally, financially. I took up running, letting the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement drown out the noise in my head. I started painting again, pouring my emotions onto the canvas, creating beauty out of the chaos they'd left behind. But closure was elusive. One evening, I received a call from my father. For a moment, I considered ignoring it like all the others. But something made me answer. His voice was quiet, broken. "Your mother. She's sick. Cancer. It's bad, Evan." The air left my lungs. My mother. The woman who'd stood by Daniel, who defended him even after everything, but she was still my mother. I thought you should know," my father continued. "She's asking for you." I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on me. I'd spent so long being angry, so long pushing them away, and now I didn't know what to feel. I packed my bags that night, driving back to the town I swore I'd never return to. The hospital was cold, sterile, the air heavy with antiseptic and despair. I found her lying in that hospital bed, her body frail, her face pale and tired. She looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. "Evan, you came." I stood frozen, my anger battling with grief. "You defended him. You chose him over me." Her face crumpled. "I was wrong. I see that now. I didn't want to lose my family. I thought, if I could keep us together, it would be okay." I sat down beside her, my voice shaking. "You lost me the moment you took his side. You lost me the moment you refused to see the truth." She reached out, her hand trembling. "I'm sorry. I was blind. I didn't want to believe he could do something so terrible, but I know now. I know I failed you." I looked at her, at the woman who'd raised me, who'd loved me, who'd broken me, and I realized how tired I was of carrying the anger, the resentment. It was like poison, eating away at me. I took her hand, feeling the frailness of her bones. "I lost everything, Mom. My wife, my brother, my family." Her tears fell silently. "I know, and I can't fix that. But I want you to know, I love you. I always have, even when I was wrong." We sat there in silence, the weight of unspoken words heavy between us. For the first time in months, I let myself grieve. For the mother I lost, for the brother who betrayed me, for the wife who shattered my heart. When she fell asleep, I stayed by her side, watching her breathe, realizing that forgiveness wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about freeing myself. I visited her every day after that, spending time with her, sharing stories of my new life. I started talking to my father again, slowly, cautiously. We were both wounded, both struggling to find a way forward. Daniel stayed away. He knew better than to face me now. But I heard whispers of his life, how he was trying to rebuild, how he was struggling to find work, to find himself. Part of me pitied him, but another part of me was glad. He deserved to face the consequences of his actions. Months later, my mother passed away, peacefully in her sleep. I stood at her grave, my father by my side, the weight of loss heavy on my shoulders. But this time, it wasn't the suffocating pain of betrayal. It was the bittersweet ache of love and grief. As we walked away, my father looked at me, his eyes weary. I miss her already. I nodded, the tears blurring my vision. So do I. We stood there in silence, letting the pain settle between us. He put a hand on my shoulder, his touch hesitant, fragile. I'm sorry for everything. Evan. Life moved forward in uneven strides. Some days were heavy, shadows of the past clinging to my thoughts, while others felt lighter, the sun breaking through the clouds of grief. My mother's absence was palpable, an ache that lingered in quiet moments. But there was also a strange sense of peace, a closure I hadn't expected to find. I kept my distance from Daniel, refusing to let him back into my life. He'd reached out once, through a letter he gave to my father asking for forgiveness, claiming he was lost and confused when he made those choices. He wrote about his guilt, about how he replayed his betrayal over and over, haunted by the faces of those he'd hurt. I read his words, feeling the bitterness rise, the anger clawing its way back to the surface. But I was done being his victim. I didn't need his apology to move on. I didn't need anything from him anymore. I threw the letter away. I focused on rebuilding my life, one step at a time. I went back to painting, turning my spare room into a studio. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in colors and shapes, creating beauty out of chaos. I poured everything into those canvases, the pain, the anger, the sorrow. And slowly the weight began to lift. I started dating again, cautiously at first. It felt strange, opening up to someone new, letting them see the cracks in my armor. But it was also liberating. I met a woman named Hannah, a kind-hearted soul with a smile that could light up a room. She listened without judgment, her presence a soothing balm to old wounds. I didn't rush it. I'd learned the hard way about the fragility of trust. But we grew closer, our laughter echoing through my once-empty apartment. She helped me see that love could be gentle, that it didn't have to hurt. I visited my father often. Losing my mother had softened him, his once stern demeanor replaced with a quiet vulnerability. We'd sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, letting the silence fill in the gaps. He never asked me to forgive Daniel again. He knew better. But forgiveness is a strange thing. It's not always about the person who wronged you. Sometimes it's about setting yourself free. One afternoon, I found myself driving past the old neighborhood, past the house where everything fell apart. The lawn was overgrown, the windows dark and empty. It looked as broken as I once felt. I pulled over, staring at the place that held so many memories, both beautiful and painful. I stood there for a long time, letting the memories wash over me. I remembered the nights spent laughing with Daniel, sharing secrets, dreams, and fears. I remembered the way Lisa used to look at me, the warmth in her eyes before the lies took over. I remembered the life I'd built there, the life they shattered. But that life was gone, and I was still standing. I walked away from that house, leaving the ghosts behind. They belonged to the past. My future was waiting somewhere else. Hannah was there when I got home, her arms wrapping around me, grounding me in the present. I held her close, realizing how far I'd come, how much I'd healed. I would never forget what they did to me, but I wouldn't let it define me either. Months later, I got an invitation to Daniel's wedding. He was marrying Lisa. I felt the familiar sting, the echo of betrayal, but it didn't cut as deep this time. I stared at the ornate card, the elegant calligraphy spelling out their names, their new beginning built on the ashes of my past. I didn't go. I didn't need to. I took Hannah's hand and we went for a walk by the river, watching the sunlight dance on the water. My past was behind me, and my future was mine to shape. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt the weight finally lift, the last pieces of my shattered heart falling into place. I was free. Years passed, and life continued to weave its unpredictable tapestry. Hannah and I built a life together, one filled with laughter, trust, and quiet moments of joy. We moved into a new house, a place that was ours and ours alone, untainted by the past. My art began to gain recognition. Galleries reached out, eager to showcase my work. It was surreal, seeing my pain and healing displayed for the world to see. People connected with my story through the brushstrokes, the colors capturing emotions words couldn't express. One evening after an exhibition, a familiar face approached me. It was Daniel. His hair was grayer, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if burdened by invisible weights. There was no arrogance in his eyes, just a tiredness that mirrored his regrets. "I saw your name on the flyer," he said, his voice careful, measured. I had to see for myself." I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch between us. He glanced at one of my paintings, a chaotic swirl of reds and blacks, raw and visceral. "That one. It feels like pain, like everything's falling apart." I looked at the canvas, remembering the night I'd painted it, the tears that had mixed with the paint, the rage that had fueled each stroke. "It was," I replied. "But I survived." His shoulders sagged, his hands trembling. "I never meant to hurt you, not like that." His voice broke, the guilt etched into every line on his face. "I lost you, and Mom. Sometimes I think I lost myself too." The bitterness was there, bubbling beneath the surface, but it wasn't as sharp. I'd carried that anger long enough. I looked at him, the brother who had betrayed me, the man who was now a stranger. "I don't hate you anymore, Daniel," I said quietly. "But I don't forgive you either. Maybe I never will, but I'm not letting you live in my head anymore. You don't get that power over me." He blinked, the weight of my words sinking in. He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I understand." He turned to leave, but hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I hope you find happiness." I watched him walk away, his figure fading into the crowd. It felt like the closing of a chapter, the final note in a song that had played for too long. Hannah appeared at my side, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Are you okay?" I squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch grounding me. "Yeah, I think I am." We stood there for a moment, watching the world move around us, unaffected by the ghosts I was finally laying to rest. Life went on. Seasons changed, years slipping by like pages in a book. Daniel and I never rebuilt our bond, but we found a semblance of peace, an unspoken truce. I heard about him from my father, about his struggles, and his attempts to mend what he'd broken. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Hannah and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony by the sea. There were no grand speeches or elaborate celebrations, just us, our closest friends, and the ocean as our witness. I vowed to love her with everything I had, to trust her, to build a life based on honesty and respect. We had children. 2 beautiful boys who carried her smile and my eyes. I watched them grow, teaching them about love, loyalty, and the importance of trust. I became the father I always wished mine had been, present, supportive, unyielding in my love. On my mother's birthday each year, we visited her grave, placing lilies on the headstone, the boys asking about the grandmother they'd never meet. I told them stories about her laughter, her kindness, the way she'd made me feel safe even when the world fell apart. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, a reminder of love lost but never forgotten. One evening, while tucking my eldest into bed, he asked me, "Daddy, do you still love Uncle Daniel?" I paused, my heart clenching. Children had a way of asking the simplest yet hardest questions. I don't know, I admitted, but I hope he's happy. And that's enough. He seemed satisfied with that answer, his small arms wrapping around my neck. I love you. Daddy, I held him close, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I love you too, buddy. Always. As I turned off the light and closed his door, I realized that forgiveness didn't always have to be spoken. Sometimes it was letting go of the hate, of the need for revenge. It was choosing to live, to love, to be happy, despite the pain. I had found my peace, and that was enough. The past was behind me, the future stretching out like an endless canvas, waiting for me to paint my own story. And this time, it would be filled with hope, love, and the promise of new beginnings. Years rolled by like waves upon the shore, steady and relentless. Our boys grew up, their laughter filling our home, their curiosity shaping them into young men I was endlessly proud of. Hannah remained my rock, her love a constant reminder that life, despite its trials, could still be beautiful. My paintings continued to evolve, reflecting the journey of healing and growth. They became more vibrant, layered with hope rather than pain. Critics praised my work, calling it transformative, powerful. But to me, it was simply a record of my heart's resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the living room, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice trembled as he spoke, the news heavy, weighted with sorrow. Daniel was gone. A heart attack, sudden and cruel, leaving behind more questions than answers. He'd been alone when it happened. Lisa found him the next morning, slumped over his desk, a half-written apology letter beside him. Grief wrapped its cold fingers around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I sat in silence, trying to process the loss of a man who had been my brother, my friend, and my betrayer. Hannah took my hand, her presence anchoring me. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her eyes searching mine. I shook my head, unable to find the words. How could I explain the tangled mess of emotions coursing through me? The anger, the pain, the love, the regret. I attended his funeral, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching as they lowered him into the earth. Lisa wept openly, her shoulders shaking, her face pale and drawn. I felt a pang of pity for her despite everything. She had loved him once, and maybe still did, in her own way. My father looked older than I remembered, his face etched with grief. He stood alone, his hands trembling as he laid a rose on the coffin. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw the weight of a father who had lost a son, who had watched his family fall apart and was now burying a piece of his heart. After the service, he approached me, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, the words lodged in my throat. We stood in silence, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, he spoke, his voice cracking. "I lost both my sons long before today. I just didn't want to admit it." A lump formed in my throat, my chest tightening. "You didn't lose me," I whispered. "I just needed space to heal." His shoulders sagged, relief washing over his face. "I miss you. I miss the way things used to be." I looked at the grave, at the name etched in stone, final and unchangeable. "Me too," I admitted. "But we can't go back. We can only move forward," he nodded, wiping his eyes. "I don't want to lose you too." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the fragility beneath my fingers. "You won't," it was a promise. As I walked away from the cemetery, I felt the weight of unfinished business pressing down on me. Daniel was gone, his apologies left unsaid, his regrets lingering like echoes. I went to his house the next day, needing closure. Lisa answered the door, her eyes swollen, her face drawn. She looked at me with a mixture of shame and sorrow. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't either," I admitted. "But I needed to say goodbye." She stepped aside, letting me in. The house was eerily quiet, the air thick with loss. I looked around, my gaze landing on the desk where he'd spent his last moments. The letter was still there, unfinished, the ink smudged where his hand had fallen. I picked it up, my heart pounding as I read the words. "I'm sorry for everything. I was lost, and I hurt the one person who always stood by me. I wish I could go back. I wish I could be the brother you deserved." The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, spilling over as the realization sank in. He had carried his guilt, until the end, never finding the redemption he sought. Lisa watched me, her own eyes glistening. "He never stopped loving you, even when he was at his worst. He hated himself for what he did." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my voice trembling. "Why did he do it? Why did you?" She looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. "I don't." "No, I was selfish, insecure. He was lost, and I was looking for something I thought I'd lost with you. We were broken, and we broke you in the process." Her honesty cut deep, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. The truth, however painful, was better than the lies. "I don't hate you anymore," I said softly. "But I can't forgive you either." She nodded, her shoulders sagging. "I don't deserve it." I looked around the room, at the remnants of a life that had once been intertwined with mine. "Take care of yourself, Lisa, and take care of his memory." I walked out of that house, leaving behind the ghosts that had haunted me for so long. The anger, the betrayal, the pain, they were still there, but they no longer controlled me. I chose to remember Daniel as he was before the lies, before the hurt. The years that followed were defined by a quiet, steady peace. My life with Hannah flourished in ways I hadn't expected. We built something beautiful together, a home filled with love, laughter, and the gentle hum of daily life. The echoes of my past, once so loud and consuming, had softened into whispers, their sharp edges dulled by time and acceptance. Our boys grew older, entering their teenage years with the same curiosity and determination I had once possessed. There were still challenges. Parenting was never a straight path, but there was something immensely fulfilling about guiding them, helping them navigate a world that could sometimes be as confusing and unforgiving as the one I had known. Hannah and I had found a rhythm, a bond that only strengthened with time. We spent quiet evenings together, reading books, talking about everything and nothing. The world around us felt both large and small. Large in its wonders, small in the sense that I knew, finally, where I belonged. But despite the tranquility I had cultivated, there were days when I still thought of Daniel, of the boy who had once been my closest companion. In my quieter moments, I would wonder if there could have been another way, a way to fix what had been broken. Sometimes, on nights when the house was still and the boys were asleep, I'd sit with a glass of whiskey in hand, gazing at the stars. The same stars that had watched over us all those years ago, when I had been a younger man, so full of hope and pain. I would think of Daniel then, of his silent, unseen battle with himself and the twisted way it had pulled him away from me. But I didn't linger in that place anymore. I couldn't. One evening, as the sky shifted from twilight to darkness, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach twist, a number I hadn't seen in years. Lisa. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Is this still okay?" Her voice was small, fragile. I know it's been a long time, but I've been thinking about you, about everything. I wanted to reach out. I didn't want the past to be the last word between us." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words sinking in. There was a vulnerability in her tone I hadn't expected, a quiet plea for something, anything, to mend the years of silence. But I wasn't sure I could offer that. Not anymore. I don't know what to say, Lisa, I admitted, my throat tightening. I've moved on, and I think that's what Daniel would have wanted for both of us. She exhaled, the sound like a fragile sigh. I know, She paused, her voice thick. I never wanted to be the reason for your pain. I thought if I could change things, I could make it right. I don't think anything could have made it right, I said quietly, my mind drifting back to the betrayal, to the hurt that had been impossible to erase. But it doesn't have to stay broken either. I've forgiven you in my own way, Lisa, but I can't change what happened. There was a long pause, her silence pressing down on me. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I've spent so many years blaming myself for what I did, for what I let happen. I don't expect anything from you, but I needed you to know. I was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words settling deep. I hope you find peace, Lisa, I said softly. I truly do. The conversation ended on that note, neither of us pushing for more. When I hung up the phone, I sat there in the stillness, the quiet of the room surrounding me. It felt like the closing of a door, not a slam, but a gentle final click. Something had been said that had needed to be spoken, and now the past was where it belonged, far behind me. This following morning, I woke to the warmth of the sun creeping through the curtains and Hannah beside me, her breath slow and steady. She was my anchor, the one person who had never wavered. And I realized as I watched her sleep that I no longer had to carry the weight of my past. The grief, the anger, it had all melted into something softer, something that no longer held me captive. As the years moved forward, I continued to live, to love, to learn. My art became an extension of my peace, my paintings reflecting not just the world outside, but the world within, a place of clarity and understanding. I watched my boys grow into young men, their paths still unfolding, and I knew deep in my bones that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had survived the betrayal. I had survived the loss. And in the end, I had come to understand that the past, no matter how painful, did not define me. I chose to define myself with the love I had found, the life I had built, and the family I cherished, and that was enough. As the years continued to pass, the passage of time seemed to weave its own tapestry, one that felt more like a quiet rhythm rather than a series of dramatic highs and lows. The intensity of the past faded, replaced by moments of calm and simple joys, yet there were always lingering questions, fragments of the past that would drift in and out of my thoughts. One evening, after another full day of work and family life, I found myself alone in the studio, the soft hum of the house in the background. The room was filled with unfinished canvases, pieces of myself that I hadn't yet been able to fully express. But tonight, I couldn't focus on them. My mind kept returning to something that had been quietly gnawing at me for some time. The key. Guilt I felt for not seeking forgiveness from my own heart. It wasn't about Daniel anymore, or Lisa. It wasn't about the betrayal or the ghosts of our past. It was about me, and the way I had buried certain feelings for so long, convinced that moving on meant never looking back. But perhaps it was time to confront those lingering pieces. The soft click of the front door opening interrupted my thoughts. Hannah entered the room, her presence filling the space. I looked up from the canvas, surprised to see her standing there, her eyes full of concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I smiled, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." She stepped closer, her gaze softening. About? I hesitated. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that, despite everything, I still carried some unspoken weight? But as always, she seemed to read my thoughts with an uncanny precision. About the past, I finally admitted. I think there's more I need to let go of. More than just what happened. Between us and Daniel. More than the betrayals, the regrets. Hannah walked toward me and sat beside me at the desk, her fingers brushing over my hand in a comforting gesture. "You've let go of so much already, though," she said softly. "It's okay if there's still something lingering. Healing doesn't have a clear end." I know. I stopped, unsure of how to put my feelings into words. I keep thinking I should have done more for him, for Daniel. I don't even know why. He didn't deserve my forgiveness, but I guess part of me thought if I could fix that, if I could make peace with him, it would erase the pain. But it's not gone. Not completely. Hannah listened quietly, her eyes not judging, just understanding. You can't fix everything. Sometimes people don't ask for forgiveness because they can't give it to themselves first. But that doesn't mean you have to carry their burden anymore. I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. Maybe that's what it was. I wasn't carrying Daniel's weight anymore. I was carrying my own. The weight of not forgiving myself for things that were out of my control. "I still miss him, you know?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I still wish things had turned out differently, but I don't think I'll ever get that chance with him. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe what I need is to forgive myself for not having all the answers." Hannah's hand found mine, squeezing it gently. "You're allowed to feel that way, and I think, in your own way, you already have forgiven yourself. You're just realizing it now." There was a deep sense of clarity in her words. In that moment, I realized I didn't need to keep seeking closure in places I couldn't reach. The truth was that forgiveness wasn't a one-time decision. It was a process. And I had been in that process for a long time without realizing it. "Thank you," I whispered, the weight that had been quietly pressing on my chest lightening just a bit. She smiled, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "You don't have to thank me. Just remember, you're not alone in this. You never were." That night, as I laid in bed beside her, I thought of all the things I had survived, the betrayals, the losses, the heartache. But most of all, I thought about the love that had carried me through it all, the love I had found again, the love I had nurtured, and the love that, in the end, had made me whole again. I had come a long way, and while the past would always be a part of me, it no longer defined my future. I was free to move forward, free to embrace the life I had built with the people I loved, and that was enough. As the seasons changed, the days settled into their familiar patterns, yet there was something different about this time. A peace had settled in my heart. Not a stillness born of resignation, but one forged through understanding and acceptance. The past no longer clung to me like a shadow, but rather stood behind me as a part of my story, one that no longer dictated how I moved through the world. Hannah and I continued to nurture our relationship, watching as our children grew into young adults, carving out their own paths with the kind of strength I had longed to see in myself during my younger years. They were thoughtful, curious, driven, qualities I was proud to have helped instill in them, but even prouder that they had cultivated on their own. I thought of Daniel sometimes, especially when I saw my boys take on challenges with a tenacity that mirrored my younger self. Would he have been proud of them? Would he have been different if he'd lived a different life? These questions, which once felt like chains binding me to the past, had slowly started to feel more like open roads. Questions without answers, but questions I no longer feared. One day, As the sun hung low in the sky, casting its warm golden light over the house, there was a knock on the door. I hadn't been expecting anyone. When I opened it, I was greeted by the sight of a man I hadn't seen in years. It was Richard, Daniel's old friend, the one who had been there before everything fell apart, the one who knew the secrets Daniel had carried, the secrets he'd left behind in his wake. He had aged, just like I had. His face was lined with the years, his eyes more weary than they once had been, but there was something in his gaze that was familiar. "I wasn't sure if I'd find you here," Richard said, his voice thick with years of silence between us. "But I needed to talk. There's something you should know." I motioned for him to come in. My curiosity piqued. As he stepped inside, I noticed his discomfort, the way his gaze shifted from the paintings on the wall to the family pictures scattered on the mantelpiece. It was clear he hadn't expected to find such peace in my home. "Are you okay?" I asked, though the question felt heavy on my tongue. He exhaled slowly, like a man carrying a burden too long ignored. "I don't know. I thought I'd left all of this behind, but I made a mistake, a big one." His words trailed off as though he wasn't sure how to continue. "Talk to me," I said, my voice steady but with a hint of the old unease creeping in. Richard had always been a man of secrets, a man who knew too much but spoke too little. "I don't know where to start," he muttered. "Maybe I should have told you years ago. But I was protecting myself, protecting Daniel. There was more to his story than you knew, more to why he did what he did." He paused, his eyes flickering. "To mine. You've always been someone who faced the truth, even when it hurt. I owe you that." I remained silent, allowing him to continue. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, it was as though a dam had broken. Daniel was in over his head. There were things he got mixed up in, things he didn't know how to get out of. It wasn't just about Lisa. It wasn't just about you or the affair. It was bigger than that. I leaned in, listening intently. There were people involved, people from his past. He owed them, and it wasn't just money. It was something worse. He thought he could get out of it, but they made sure he didn't. And, well, he couldn't escape. Richard's eyes fell, and I could see the weight of what he was telling me settling over him. I felt my pulse quicken. "What are you saying? Who are these people?" Richard looked around as though making sure no one else could hear, before he finally spoke in a hushed tone. "They were dangerous people, people from the wrong side of the world, who used him to do things he regretted. When the affair happened, it wasn't just a mistake. It was part of something bigger. Daniel, he wasn't just betraying you. He was trying to survive." I swallowed hard, the pieces of the puzzle I had long since abandoned slowly falling into place. "But why didn't you say anything before? Why keep this from me?" "I didn't know how," Richard admitted. "I was trying to protect him, protect myself, and by the time I realized how deep he was in, it was already too late." For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the air. The room felt heavier, as if the weight of the secrets Richard had just revealed had made the very walls feel tighter. "I wish you'd told me earlier," I said quietly, the anger that once simmered inside me now replaced by a quiet sorrow. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything, but I could have understood him better, could have understood why he made those choices. Richard's face twisted in regret. "I know, but now you know. And maybe it doesn't change anything, but maybe it gives you a piece of the truth you've been missing." As the days turned into weeks, I began to reflect on Richard's visit more deeply. The revelation about Daniel's entanglements with dangerous people brought an unexpected sense of closure, but also a complex web of emotions. On one hand, it helped to understand why Daniel had spiraled in the way he did, why he had made choices that had torn so much of my world apart. On the other hand, It didn't excuse the pain he had caused, nor did it make the betrayals any easier to process. Yet, what I couldn't shake was the idea that maybe I had spent too much time focusing on the wrong things, on seeking out the truth behind the affair, behind the betrayal. Yes, it was important, but perhaps it had all been a distraction from something deeper. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when it hit me. The weight I had been carrying wasn't just about Daniel or about Lisa, or even the lies Richard had kept from me. It was about forgiveness, real forgiveness. The kind that didn't come with conditions. The kind that was not just about forgiving others, but also forgiving myself. Hannah noticed the change before I even put it into words. Over dinner, she looked at me with those knowing eyes, the ones that had seen me through every storm I'd weathered. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft but with a hint of curiosity. I smiled faintly, setting my fork down. "I've been thinking. About forgiveness, about letting go." She paused, her gaze steady, waiting for me to continue. "I think, for the longest time, I thought forgiveness was a transaction. That if I could just understand the why, the reason behind everything, it would make it easier. But it doesn't. It's not about the reasons. It's about accepting what happened and choosing to move forward despite it." Hannah's lips curled into a knowing smile, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've been carrying that burden for a long time. I think it's time to let it go." There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. It was as if she had been patiently waiting for me to come to this realization on my own. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of my studio, my thoughts circled back to Richard's visit. The things he had said about Daniel's desperation, the mistakes Daniel had made in trying to survive, it all made me realize something important. Daniel was never the villain in his own story. He was just a man lost in a world he couldn't control, trying to keep his head above water. I had been angry at him for so long, angry at him for tearing apart everything I had built, but I had forgotten that he was just as much a victim of his circumstances as I was of his choices. Maybe that was the heart of forgiveness, not excusing the wrong, but understanding that we all carry our own burdens, our own regrets, and sometimes those burdens weigh heavier than we realize. The next morning, I decided it was time to make a phone call. I picked up the receiver, the sound of the dial tone filling the quiet room. I wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do or if it would even bring any real peace, but in my heart, I knew it was time to try. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, unsure. "Richard?" I asked, feeling my heart race slightly. "It's me. Yeah, I didn't expect to hear from you," Richard said, his voice soft. "I've been thinking," I began, the words coming slowly but steadily, "about everything you told me, about Daniel, and I think I understand now. I want to thank you for telling me the truth. It changes things, but it also gives me a sense of closure." There was a long pause on the other end, as if Richard was absorbing what I had just said. Finally, he spoke. "I'm glad to hear that. You don't know how much that means. I never meant to keep things from you, but I just didn't know how to make it right." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "We can't change the past, Richard, but we can let go of it. I think that's what Daniel would have wanted, too." Richard's voice trembled slightly. "You think so?" "I know so." The conversation didn't last much longer after that, but something in me shifted as I hung up the phone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done something important, not for anyone else, but for myself. The next day, I took a walk by the lake near our home. The sky was clear, the sun casting a warm glow on the water. I thought about how much had changed, how much I had changed. The storm inside me that had raged for so long was slowly dying down, and in its place there was a quiet calm. I wasn't whole again, not yet. But I was getting there. As I stood by the water's edge, a thought came to me. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting the past, letting it go, and allowing space for something better to take its place. In a way, it was like the lake, always moving, always changing, but always there, regardless of the storms that came and went. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me. As the weeks turned into months, the sense of peace I had begun to cultivate continued to grow. I was more present now, not just for myself, but for the people who mattered most: Hannah, the kids, my friends, and even the few that remained from the days when Daniel and I were still close. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living in the present, rather than being haunted by ghosts of the past. But life, as it always does, has a way of throwing unexpected twists. One late autumn afternoon, I received a letter. It was hand-delivered, the kind of letter that carries an air of mystery about it before you even open it. The paper was thick, the handwriting neat, but unfamiliar. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the return address. M. I opened it with a mix of dread and curiosity. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and the words on it chilled me more than I could have expected. I know what you did. The letter was short, with no other explanation, just those 5 words. At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke, but then, as I read it again, my thoughts began to race. Was this some sort of threat? A remnant from Daniel's past? Someone else who knew too much? The last few months had been filled with nothing but peace. And now, this letter had thrown everything into chaos. I immediately went to Hannah, but even as I explained, I saw her face go pale. "Do you think this is about Daniel?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out," I replied, pacing the room. "It's not like I've been hiding anything. Not anymore. But this feels like a message, like someone is trying to pull me back into that world." We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the letter hanging between us. My mind couldn't stop turning. Who would send this? And why now, after everything had seemed to settle? I thought about reaching out to Richard, but something about the letter felt different from his confession. This wasn't the same kind of unfinished business. It was a new layer of something I hadn't even known existed. The next day, I took the letter to the local police, though they seemed less than convinced. "There's not much we can do with this, sir. It's vague. No clear threats, no real evidence to investigate," the officer had said. But even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an empty gesture. I had learned long ago that when something felt off, it usually meant something was in fact very wrong. I couldn't leave it alone. I started researching, digging into anything and everything that could explain the letter. Was it tied to Daniel's past, to the people he'd owed? Or was it someone else, a new player in a game I thought I had left behind? The more I searched, the more I realized that I had underestimated just how many strings still remained attached to my family's tangled past. But as I delved deeper, something else became clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whoever was sending these letters wanted to provoke a reaction, wanted me to take action. And the longer I sat idle, the deeper the web would grow. There was a bigger story unfolding, one I had barely begun to understand. Then, one evening, a breakthrough came. A second letter arrived, this one postmarked from a completely different city. It was even shorter than the first. "You haven't seen the full picture yet. There's more." The message, still cryptic, filled me with a rising dread. This was no random threat. This was something calculated, someone with the knowledge and patience to wait for the right moment to strike. I sat with the letters on the kitchen table, feeling the weight of them, of the past, of the people I had tried to bury, of the secrets I thought were long gone. It was as if someone, somewhere, had been watching all along, waiting for me to reach the end of my piece, only to pull me back into the mess once again. It was then that I realized the one truth that had always remained in the background. Forgiveness had its limits. And as much as I had tried to let go, as much as I had tried to move on, some stories could never truly end. Some ghosts were more persistent than others, and they were coming for me now. I had no idea where this would lead, but I knew one thing, for certain. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Hannah was right beside me, as always, but this time, we weren't just facing the future. We were facing something much darker, something from a past I couldn't fully understand yet, and as the night deepened around us, I knew that the answers would come, whether I was ready for them or not. The following days felt like I was trapped in a slow-moving storm, one that I couldn't quite outrun. The letters kept coming, each more cryptic and unsettling than the last. With each new message, the sense of being hunted, of having something, lurking just beyond the corner of my vision, grew stronger. I could feel the walls closing in, and it wasn't just me anymore. It was Hannah, too. She had grown anxious, watching me unravel as if the threads of my past were slowly pulling me back into a nightmare. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my study, poring over the letters once again, I heard a knock at the door. At first, I hesitated, wondering if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the knock came again, sharper this time, as if demanding an answer. I opened the door cautiously, and standing there, shrouded in the shadow of the porch light, was a figure I hadn't seen in years. Daniel. My heart skipped a beat. He looked the same, but there was something different about him, something cold in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. It was as if the weight of everything that had happened had aged him in ways I couldn't fully understand. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice low, gravelly. "But we need to talk. I think you're in danger." His words hit me like a punch, knocking the breath from my chest. In danger? What was he talking about? I glanced back at the house, the looming shadows inside, and then at the letters on my desk. It felt like all the pieces were finally coming together, though. I wasn't sure I was ready to face the puzzle. I stepped aside, allowing him in. The moment he crossed the threshold, I could feel the weight of his presence, like the air had changed. He looked around briefly, then turned his gaze back to me. "I know what's been happening," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "The letters, the threats. I don't know who's behind it, but I know it's tied to what I did, to what I've been running from. You don't realize it, but you're in the middle of something much bigger than you think." I was about to speak, to ask him what the hell he meant, but Daniel raised a hand to stop me. "Let me explain," he continued. "Years ago, when I got caught up in the mess with Lisa, it wasn't just about the affair. There were people involved, people you don't know, people who had leverage over me, over both of us. And when I left, I thought I could escape it all. I thought I could leave it behind. But the truth is, they've been watching you ever since." I stared at him, disbelief creeping into my thoughts. "Watching me? What are you talking about? What do you mean by they?" Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the truth was finally catching up to him. "You don't understand the full picture. The people I owed money to, the people I betrayed, they didn't forget. They've been using Lisa, manipulating her, trying to get to me through you. They know everything about your life. They knew you'd be vulnerable after the divorce, after Lisa's affair. And now, they're playing their hand." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My pulse quickened, my thoughts spinning. The letters weren't just some vague threats. They were a warning about the danger that had been silently creeping into my life for years. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the frustration bleeding through. "Why didn't you come to me when this all started?" Daniel's face darkened. I couldn't drag you into it, not after everything. I thought I could fix it myself, but I was wrong. And now, I'm telling you because I'm out of time. They're getting closer, and if you don't move fast, you'll be trapped just like I was. I sat back in my chair, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The sense of dread I had been carrying for months was suddenly crystal clear. I wasn't just dealing with a random stalker or a jealous ex. This was something much darker, a shadow from Daniel's past that had caught up with both of us. I had no choice now but to face it, to confront whatever it was that had been lurking in the background. I stood up abruptly, my mind racing. What do we do now? How do we stop them? Daniel looked at me, his eyes serious, but I could see the remnants of fear in them too. "We play the game, but we need to be smart. We need to stay one step ahead, and you'll need to trust me for once." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Trusting Daniel was the last thing I ever thought I would do again, but I had no other option. There was too much at stake now. Hannah's safety, my children's, everything I had fought to rebuild. This was no longer just about me and Daniel's fractured relationship. This was about survival. Over the next few days, Daniel and I began putting together a plan. We started by retracing his steps, where he had gone, who he had crossed, and who still had the power to ruin him. And now, me.